I would suggest that his lawyers were never fully paid, but the benefit to their careers from this role, they're going to be in demand across the country by criminals who thought, man, if you can get that guy off.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by Tucker Allen. Here's attorney CPA Joe Cordell.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week, our topic will, I think, be very interesting to you because it relates to a very sensational event and one that has received much attention. But the thing we're going to talk about for this show has received very little. Marlea, do you want to introduce our topic?
Yeah, today we're talking about O.J. Simpson.
But now this will not be like what you've seen a lot of over the years, especially recently since he's passed away. We want to focus on his death and his estate. But in order to do that, we have to talk about kind of what's gone on financially during the course of his life. So the focus will be on estate planning toward the end of his life especially, and then what's kind of gone on thereafter and what we speculate is going to go on. It's still very early since he died on what date?
He died on April 10th, 2024.
Yeah, April 10th. So it's so recent that there will be developments as far as the estate goes, but we thought that a lot of the most interesting information, the most helpful information to those of us who want to learn from others' mistakes, even O.J. Simpson, is to focus on kind of what's gone on during this period of time. What did he do? What were his plans, if any? And what are the results? So for that purpose, we don't need to see what will ultimately unfold with the family. I think we know enough now to learn something.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But if we want to get started talking about him, I can...
So, and let me issue one other disclaimer. We know also that you know a lot about his career. More than we know, I would be willing to bet, considering I'm not a huge football fan.
Me either.
And the events of his death, those two, we're probably not going to go into detail about the murder, of course. There are much better sources for this information. So we're going to stick to kind of what we know and are good at. But in order to do that, we should talk a little bit about that. So we'll spend a few minutes with his background, a few minutes more relating to the murders, especially as it relates to him financially, and then spend more time thereafter.
Yeah. All right, so O.J. Simpson was born in July in 1974 in San Francisco. He grew up in poverty. His parents divorced pretty early on in his life, and his mom ended up having to take care of him and his 3 other siblings. So he wasn't the best off financially. He grew up definitely watching his mom work a lot and not being at home, and so he didn't really have tons of good role models. His dad did actually come out as gay, and he was a drag queen, so we know, kind of in that time period.
That is really shocking to me because that would have been a bold thing to do in the...
Yes.
Geez, we'd have been talking about early 60s.
Yeah, 60s, and he died from AIDS, too, so I'm sure that was just a whole story in and of itself, which is just crazy. And I know that O.J. didn't have a huge relationship with his dad, at least that I could find, because his dad just really, I think he just walked out and honestly just left the family.
Yeah.
Yeah. He didn't have much contact with the kids.
And you can see how O.J., especially as a football player, a masculine guy that he was,
yes,
he probably didn't want anything to do with that association.
Yeah, I think that was definitely something that, as we'll go on to see, really shaped who he became as a person, just because he probably saw that side, saw what his dad did, and thought, no, I want to be better than that. I want to be the man of a family, so on and so forth. And I think that really impacted him. So in 1965, he went on to play football at the University of Southern California, and he won the Heisman Trophy there. And like we said, we don't know much about football, but I do know a little bit about that, and that is the highest honor that you can get. He was a very good football player, very well known, and then he went on to sign with the Buffalo Bills and played a majority of his career with them.
Yeah, and still holds the record, depending on how you word it, for rushing yards for a season.
Yeah, 2000.
And, he was over 2000, 2003. And while there are others who for a season have gone beyond 2,000 significantly, I think that there are 8 total who've, for an entire season. The reason that has to be qualified is that when OJ was playing, there were 14 games to a season. Now there are 16. So it's only fair to talk about that in terms of the average number of yards per game. That's the only way it makes sense. And if you measure it that way, O.J. Simpson's record is unbroken.
Everything you build for you and your family deserves protecting. All of those important assets you have worked so hard to acquire and enjoy, you want to make sure they're handled with care. At Tucker Allen, our attorneys will customize an estate plan that will work for you and your family's goals and needs. Tucker Allen, estate planning, probate, and trust administration. Visit tuckerallen.com.
I mean, think about it. After decades, no one has broken that record.
Which is crazy.
Because the records, particularly in football, they tend to get broken.
Yeah, I don't want to say easily, but usually season after season they do.
Yeah, and, athletes become, better trained. Maybe surfaces change. And I'm sure some of the other conditions might give an unfair advantage to people who come decades later for lots of reasons. But this is held. So it goes to show you, this was a rare athlete.
Yes.
I mean, he really was special.
He got married to his first wife, Marguerite, at 19, and they were together for, I believe, almost a decade. And I think kind of the thing that, the straw that broke the camel's back for just really everything for him was he had a daughter. She was 1. She was about to turn 2, and she was 1 year, 11 months, and they walked out and they found her and she had drowned in their pool. And that was his youngest daughter, and I think that was just a really a turning point mentally for him as well, because we'll kind of see after those years he starts to go downhill a little, and it's just not great. And then him and his first wife obviously divorced right after that too.
Yeah, I think his separation occurred pretty much right after.
Yeah, pretty immediately.
Which you hear that happens a lot with death of a child.
Yes.
So there were 3 kids total, but after the death of this child, there were 2.
He only had 2.
So he had 2 children from his first marriage. He goes on to marry Nicole Brown Simpson.
Yep.
They have
2
kids. So they're a total of 4 kids. We know that, I want to talk a little bit about his income prior and his assets prior to the murders, because we know that took a great toll on his net worth. So what we have are records that go back to, this would have been in 92. And one reason we know all this is because of records relating to the divorce from Nicole Brown Simpson. So at that time, in 1992, we're looking at a net worth of $10.8 million, monthly income of $55,000, which if you think about it, $55,000.
That's a lot.
In 92. It's a lot of money. Yeah. And let's see, the majority of his income stemmed from his endorsement deal with Hertz. Although he did have a generous pension, the pension, which we'll return to, was adjusted for inflation. That's part of the terms of the NFL contract pensions at the time, I assume still. So there, I'll go ahead and make adjustments up to the present. So up to, say, 18 or 19, he would have been earning still with his pension around, what was it, $10,000 a month?
$10,000, yeah.
$10,000 plus or minus $1,000. So it would have still gotten some upward adjustments from that date, from, say, 17, which I think is the last information we have. Yeah.
And I think we should touch on that. He did retire with the San Francisco 49ers, and then he went on to kind of have a film and producer career. He starred in, it was The Towering Infernos, and then Naked Gun as well. So he was kind of in a comedy, but Hertz was that really big thing for him. They endorsed the heck out of him, and he appeared in all of their commercials.
Yeah, running through the airport. You're too young to remember this, but many of our viewers remember those shots of him running through the airport, and boy, could he run. Hertz, I didn't realize Hertz was such a big source of his income. Obviously, it was.
Yeah, which it's kind of funny now thinking about it, because Hertz is still a big company, but they're more like, they're not one that runs like a ton of ads now. And I'm just speaking from like a marketing perspective. It's really odd how they have moved back, because I've seen some of those commercials and how heavily they marketed him. But after all of that stuff happened, they just kind of pulled back from their marketing, and they haven't really been the same way ever since.
Yeah. They might not have, felt, maybe it forced them to rethink the amount of marketing they were doing, period.
Yeah.
So one thing we don't know that is worth mentioning at this point is we don't know how this $10.8 million is allocated. We know that the house that O.J. bought on Rottingham, that this is the house he was living in when the murders took place at the other property, the home of Nicole Brown Simpson. And he had an obligation to pay her maintenance, so there was money being paid on that. We couldn't find that exact sum.
I didn't find anything like exactly from their divorce other than, who got custody and that he was paying her some stuff.
Yeah, so there would have been maintenance and child support being paid from this income, but clearly had the Hertz income continued, he had lots of disposable income.
Yes.
And his lifestyle reflected it.
Yes, most definitely.
But it did not, I should add that it did not appear to be lavish beyond his means at the time. But not foreseeing this sort of crisis he was about to inflict on himself.
Yes. And so I guess we kind of move on into 94. So in 91, 92, him and Nicole file for divorce. They separate. Their marriage was definitely not a happy one. The cops were called multiple times for domestic violence and just kind of all sorts of things. But OJ, unfortunately, kind of flew under the radar with them because, as I was telling you earlier, they would show up and they would kind of get excited to go to OJ's house because he's this famous guy. He's this sports broadcaster. He holds records.
And he treated them well.
He treated them so well.
Yeah, I mean, he
was friendly.
He'd remember them on holidays.
Yes, and so they'd show up with things to like sign, and then they'd kind of poke around, check things out, and then they'd leave. So nobody was really getting justice around there. Nicole really wanted out. She got out. She took the kids. They did split custody. I don't believe it was 50-50. I think it was like 75-ish. He did still see them and everything. And I haven't really found a lot on what kind of dad he was because, as we'll kind of go on to see after the murder trials, he did get custody. And his kids really have not spoke out a whole lot. And I don't know if that is because they believe something else or they were scared of their dad or anything like that. But,
you suspect it's not fair. I think that
I don't think it is.
They're probably hearing the side of the story more from the paternal grandparents or grandmother than they are, the maternal.
Yes. And I think a big factor in it too was nobody dragged them into the murder, and as we'll see, the civil case, like some children are, because they were beneficiaries of Nicole's estate, and they could have been dragged into the civil case to file motions on their behalf because nobody else could file it. But the grandparents didn't do that. Nobody really involved the kids in a way that they shouldn't have been involved. So I think they probably remained pretty neutral in how they thought of their dad with all of that going on. But all of that said, 1994 comes around. It is June 12th. We all kind of know the story. Nicole was at her apartment, and the waiter that she had gone to the same restaurant that he worked at Mezzaluna, his name's Ron Goldman, he was coming to give her mom's glasses because her mom went to dinner with her and she had forgotten them. Nicole comes outside, and she sees a shadow, and supposedly, I don't want to, reach one way or another.
You have to speculate to some extent.
Yeah. So supposedly OJ is there. OJ starts attacking her. Ron shows up. He starts attacking Ron, kills him, and then he kills Nicole. And then he flees, gets on a plane in Los Angeles, flies to Chicago, and then returns back to Los Angeles the next day. In all of that, the police find the bodies. They're kind of suspecting somebody. And they find like shoe prints, they find blood prints, and they kind of match it up to OJ.
What many of us believe is ample evidence to have convicted.
Yes.
What's really strange about this whole episode of American history is the extent to which people were divided by race between what their opinions were regarding the guilt of OJ. It was almost uncanny, but the difference is dramatic.
It is wild. And the LAPD police weren't really helping themselves throughout the whole entire time, throughout the trial, the murder, everything like that. There had been a lot of diversity in the years before, and just going into it, this was the thing that really blew everything up. And I think people, I don't know today if people still believe, one way or another. I think people definitely have their opinions about how the trial went. And we all know OJ eventually was acquitted, and he kind of went on to live his life for a little bit, and people were really upset about that.
Yeah, it was, it's funny, people who are old enough, this may not include you, can remember where they were when that judgment was read. Justin?
I was in Florida with my family vacationing, and I do distinctly remember watching that trial on TV while I was on vacation.
So I remember vividly where I was at that time. My wife and I were practicing law together, and we had gone to lunch, as we always did. We were at Cafe Napoli, and Tony at Cafe Napoli had TVs set up. I mean, there were like two rooms, or a large room with two parts, and he had TVs set up in both so that people could watch this. It was that big a deal, the reading of the verdict.
Yeah.
So the whole restaurant got quiet. I mean, this is a large restaurant, noonday, and it got quiet, and everybody waited. And I remember there was stunned silence, because now these were all white people, almost entirely. And it was stunned silence. Nobody said anything. And then I looked later in the evening at other venues where they had a large black customer base. And the black community saw this entirely differently. And there was cheering, and in their minds, this is somebody who was not guilty, but who the LA police had tried to frame. And so they managed to get out. He managed to get out to escape their net. So what a difference in opinion.
It's crazy. And I was reading some things that it was, how many people were watching? Over 110 million viewers were watching when the verdict was announced. And then it coincided with the president's speech. And I didn't
remember that.
Yeah, I didn't really do a lot of research on that, but there was like speculation that the president had called to ask them to like push the verdict, and like all kinds of weird conspiracy theories about it. But the poor news stations that whole entire day had to like cancel episodes, is what I was reading, of stuff, and like move all kinds of like shows around and all kinds of things. So I can only imagine the madness that ensued.
Well, now that I would find it believable. So the president contacted the jury and said, "Look, I want you guys to make
it." It was actually the State of the Union.
Oh my gosh! Not in the middle of the day.
Occurred. Says President Clinton's State of the Union occurred concurrently with the announcement of the verdict on February 4th, 1997. How about a bad timing for that?
I thought that was always later. Maybe I've been watching an evening event that was pre-recorded, but I'm used to watching the State of the Union in the evening, I thought. But anyway, no, I don't doubt what you just said. So here's where we're going. We're not going to spend any more time talking about the trial itself or OJ's incredible background. But the consequences of that trial, I mean, as you might imagine, dramatically changed OJ's life. He may have avoided being locked up, but he was persona non grata everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Country clubs, it was, now no one would be sympathetic with this, I understand, but his life dramatically changed for somebody who had been so scrupulous about protecting his image.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if in all of that, if in the trial and everything, he wasn't thinking like, what if I am acquitted? What happens to my life then? Because he was happy when he was acquitted, obviously. But then I don't think he thought of the aftermath, and nothing's going to be the same ever again. I mean, he was ostracized from society. Nobody wanted anything to do with him because everybody was either scared of him or...
Yeah, and I know that I'll incur the wrath of some viewers for making this comment, but I kind of felt sorry for him a couple times. Things I read about that happened to him afterwards. I was in Kentucky for the Kentucky Derby, as I am every year, and he was apparently at the Derby one year, and he went in a steakhouse to have dinner, a nice steakhouse downtown Louisville. I think it may have been Shula's. I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, went in the steakhouse, and the proprietor came up to him at a table. He was with a couple other people and told him to leave the restaurant. So, he was found not guilty by a jury. And true, that doesn't mean he was found innocent by a jury. As a lawyer, I know the difference, and I assume you do too. But he was found not guilty by a jury. And for the world to conclude and to treat him as a murderer, I mean, we all have that right. I get it. So I don't want to appear to suggest that people don't have the right to exclude him. It probably was the appropriate thing, quite frankly. But still, I mean, I'm affected by his greatness as an athlete, by his great citizenship up until this terrible event that I believe he committed. But I do believe he committed it I believe it's a crime of passion.
Yeah.
And that does matter versus a premeditation murder. I do believe it's a crime of passion. So it affects my perspective regarding O.J. And I know in saying this that many of you strongly disagree, and I understand that. I completely get it. So afterwards, we go from a net worth of around, we know 10.1 in 92. We can assume some appreciation. Those are pretty good years economically, 92 to 95. So easily this number's gone to 13 million pretty easily. We have to speculate because we don't have documents regarding this point in time. And then, of course, we know that what he spent on the quote-unquote dream team, Barry, Shaq. I mean, he had F. Lee Bailey, Robert Shapiro, and who was
Kardashian.
Yeah, but who was the guy that the lawyer that was the lead counsel? Johnny Cochran. Johnny Cochran. Yeah. I mean, let me tell you, it was a dream team.
That was a wild team.
And the one that was least sexy or impressive in virtually all respects was Shaq, except Barry Shaq, man, he delivered the goods. He was the authority on DNA, and DNA was what the prosecution was hanging their hat on. So we said we weren't going to talk about this, but anyway, these guys cost a lot of money. We'll just say that. And do we think he could easily have spent $3 to $4 million? Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm guessing that he comes out of the trial with his net worth cut in half, clearly. And he's lost the primary source of his income, which we previously have said was Hertz. So now we know he has his pension coming in. We know that he also has some tax-deferred assets. We don't know that number either. We know that assets such as 401ks, IRAs are probably a dominant part of his liquid net worth, and that was, we can assume, easily several million. If we assume that he contributed what he could regularly and took advantages of the appreciation that occurred during, again, a decade where there's a lot of appreciation in the 90s. So this money, another feature that the tax-deferred assets would have is that they have what's called asset protection. And asset protection is relevant in this discussion because after this judge ruled, there was this flurry of effort on the part of those who could to sue him, most prominently, of course, the Goldman family, to sue him in court for civil damages. And one reason that this was a result that was not contradictory to the result of the criminal trial is that the standards are different. the standard for a criminal trial is beyond all reasonable doubt. So the challenge of the prosecution had to be to prove their case. I'm going to grab a number. It's not defined in textbooks as being 90, 95%. It's not a specific percentage, but the idea is it's very high. So for the sake of illustration, I'll say that the jury should have a confidence level of 95% confidence in order to convict. They don't need 100%, but it's beyond all reasonable doubt. So, I'll say 95%. By contrast, we do know what that percentage of confidence would be when it comes to a standard of a simple lawsuit, a civil lawsuit, which is more likely than not. So we can define that. That means something in excess of 50%. Could even be something between 50% and 51%, but still it means that ever so slightly the scales in the mind tilt in favor of one verdict versus another. So when people look at these civil cases that took place, the civil case, I think there are two, by Goldman, and the result that was yielded in the criminal case and say, well, oh my gosh, these are schizophrenic outcomes. They're really not. They're not at all. So apparently, and who knows, maybe this jury that let O.J. walk, if there had been a 50%, 51% standard of confidence, even they may have convicted. We don't know.
Yeah.
But it wasn't surprising. Everyone expected O.J. to be found liable in this civil case. So the liability resulted in a judgment of $33.2 or so million. This money, part of it was actual damages and part of it was deemed to be punitive. The bulk of it was punitive.
Yeah, I read a lot that it had to be like 9 out of 12 jurors. One juror was dismissed in the civil suit. It was the only black female juror. And then the judge in that civil suit also he was straight to the point. He didn't want like any race comments. He didn't want anything made about that. He had the civil suit done in half the time of the criminal trial, which...
Well, he had learned from watching Judge Ito.
Yeah. And he was like, I don't care about any of the publicity or anything like that. And he was like, I just want it done and over with. And that one was very go, go, go. And
yeah, he had to have watched the whole mess with Judge Ito and the cameras, and he must have said to himself, that's not going to be in my court.
Yeah. So my question also is, when they do jury selection with something like that, where like he was acquitted and then it had civil, how would they even go about doing that? Because everybody on that, would they care at that point? Like, I mean, they'd care to a certain extent, but...
Well, yeah, you have to, it's called voir dire, where you select a jury. And in selecting a jury, you can't always be confident. Matter of fact, it's not unusual that people would have heard of something. Yeah, so you end up having to lower your bar, whether you're attorney for plaintiff or the defense, depending on who you suspect the greater bias is going to favor or disfavor. But in that case, yeah, you do try to make a selection, as in the Trump case, where naturally everybody's heard of Trump, and furthermore, almost everybody's heard of, in broad terms, these disputes. So it's asking too much to find people who don't know anything about the one of the parties or the outcome or the allegations. But you do try to find people who are not biased. So when we look at the outcome of this civil litigation, where you have a $33 million judgment, a judgment that Trump saw coming. Now, that action was filed in, I think, 97.
Yes, 97.
So we had a judgment that was issued by what, that same year?
Yeah, it was, they finished that trial, I believe, in like February-ish.
Of what?
Of 97. And then they went on to do all of the, the financial end of it, and it was
okay. So it's not important the exact year, but so it came. My point is, it came very quickly. So this is something that O.J. would have expected. He would have expected it during the trial. So on the one hand, he definitely had to pay up to his lawyers. I'm sure that he had to prioritize payments to them. Although I would suggest that his lawyers were never fully paid, but the benefit to their careers from this role. I mean, I would have thought that knowing OJ's difficult financial circumstances, that all of these, if a good portion of these lawyers, if not all, marked off some of what he owed them. I just think that there's no question there was such huge benefit to their careers. They're going to be in demand across the country by criminals who thought, man, if you can get that guy off, those who have money. So I really doubt that they collected 100 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
So we're going to break this show into 2 parts. I didn't expect it actually to go this long, Marley. You and I have a bad reputation for this. Anyway, it wasn't our intention to go quite as long. But I hope you find it helpful. But in any case, we have it divided up in chapters so you can kind of move through the things you're not interested in. I'll tell you, the second half of the show, we'll talk more specifically, now that we've set the stage, we'll talk more specifically about the financial issues relating to O.J. Simpson and his estate. And I think you'll find these very interesting. We're going to talk especially about asset protection. So see you next time in part 2.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement, sponsored by Tucker Allen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week, we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit tuckerallen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.